Well, good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder and this is BRN AM for Monday, August 24th, 2020. And our top stories today, colleges reopen and then some close, and housing developers begin to pressure public universities. Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is Rick Seltzer. He's an editor with Inside Higher Ed. Rick, welcome back to the program. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you, as always, for having me.
It's great to talk with you. So let's dive right in. We're getting close to colleges, universities getting ready to reopen. What's the latest that you're hearing on the ground?
Yeah, we actually have had a few who have already moved to reopen in-person instruction because they bumped up their traditional schedules. So, we all think end of August, time to go back, maybe third week in August, fourth week in August, students are back on campus. No. A couple of places, couple outliers have already welcomed students back as early as the beginning of August. Now, typically what was happening there, and it's hard to generalize because they all had kind of disparate plans this year, but what was happening was they would bring students back in kind of a staggered move-in. And by students, I mean undergraduate students. A lot of these places have had graduate students and researchers on campus all summer because they never really shut down key projects there. But the undergraduates have been moving in now since early August in a couple of campuses, and they would stagger the times. So you would see like a week-long move-in where before maybe these campuses would be doing it in a matter of days. So you'd have about a week of move-in, maybe a week in between, and then classes starting. And what we have seen is at least one major university, UNC Chapel Hill, had to call off in-person classes after only a week of holding them because they were getting very large numbers and very large growth in the numbers of positive coronavirus or COVID-19 tests. The students there moved in August 3rd. Like I said, that process lasted about a week, and they pulled the plug on in-person classes for undergraduates and actually said they're going to start sending undergraduates home as of Monday, August 17th. So just 2 weeks later. You were looking at between August 10th and August 16th, that campus tested almost 1,000 students for the virus. About 130 tested positive. They were reporting a positivity rate of 13.6%. Now, I don't know that there's a hard set number for campuses, but the World Health Organization tells countries and states, don't start easing your restrictions until you're at a 5% positivity rate or below that. So you're talking almost 3 times or well over 2 times that rate, and it was growing on campus. The other thing that seems to have contributed to them making that decision is they had 177 students in isolation, 349 in quarantine, and reportedly had used up all of the rooms that they had set aside for quarantining students. They had about 4 left when they made the call. And so you were looking at some clusters of cases. They were all said to be connected to either dormitories or Greek housing. The university put that out probably to assure professors that no, this wasn't spreading in your classrooms. And most universities that I've seen have been spacing out desks, talking about ventilation. I'm not really clear on how many places actually have done real infrastructure upgrades to ventilation that would maybe be the best mitigation that I've heard from some medical professionals, but that's again across the board. I don't know the situation there exactly at UNC. Anyway, I think that the point of whether it's spreading in classrooms is very important for faculty members. I do think the question of dormitories, though, is more important because just like whether it's the Diamond Princess or any cruise ship, again and again, this virus has shown us it spreads in contained living spaces. And we're seeing big questions at colleges and universities about whether they have figured out how to encourage students, shall we say, to have good behaviors that do not encourage the spread of virus, or even if good behaviors in certain dormitories matter, right? Like there are some videos of various parties in dorms, and obviously that is going to be a potential super spreader event. But if I go back to my 4-person suite and I take my mask off, is that enough? If I have a study buddy over and we work in close concert without our masks for an hour, is that enough? The modeling I've seen out there isn't great on this stuff yet. So, it's big questions. This Chapel Hill situation really is kind of a whiplash for students, parents, faculty. And I think it raises the question of, was it worth it, right? Was it worth the risk? I can't answer that, but I do think that's something we're going to see picked apart over the next weeks, and probably as other campuses run into similar situations.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. A lot of lessons there, and I think there's a lot of changes going to be happening on the fly, which you indicated about with Chapel Hill. Now, what about, I guess, pandemic projections? I think Georgia Tech was one that came to mind, or was it Georgia? We had talked about offline about a surge, and perhaps rise in cases or even deaths. What can you tell us there?
Yeah, it is Georgia Tech. And basically, we back in June, a bunch of reporters at Inside Higher Ed, so all the credit to the whole team. We did some public information requests, just seeking more information on the decision-making processes, because a lot of these campuses seem to be moving, and they are putting out strong statements. We will be open for in-person instruction. We will find a plan that works. And ultimately, that raises the question, well, okay, so what information are you considering? So we sought a number of documents, but one of the ones that I thought would be most interesting and most important was modeling that administrators use, asking what infection rates can we expect, what fatalities can we expect if certain things happen. And we had to do a relatively small slice of the world, actually a very small slice of the world, but we tried to focus on large public research universities, threw in a couple other types of institution too, just for the diversity of understanding. But I was actually very disappointed in what we got back from most places. We only got back one hit that said administrators used any type of mathematical modeling to make their decisions about whether to reopen in the fall. Now, it's possible we had a bad request, or possible they're kind of playing things a little bit so they don't have to release bad numbers. I don't know. But what we got back, I thought was really important. And it was Georgia Tech, to their credit, released a document that a professor had presented to a reopening committee. And it basically said, if we have an unmitigated scenario, so if we don't put in place any social distancing, any mask wearing, and 50% of campus gets infected, what can we expect to happen? And the eyebrow-raising number there is, you can expect about 75 people to die on that campus. And that's not a huge number at a campus with enrollment of 27,000, but you know what? One death is a huge number for a significant portion of people, including who dies.
Unless you're one of the 75, then it's 100. Then it's 100%. I mean, that's not a good number.
That's exactly right. And so I think one thing that's really important here is college and university administrators have been very reluctant. I don't know how many, if any, I've heard talk about death or student death. The talking point has been, it does not affect students at very high rates. And this projection said you can expect 10 students to die, 30 staff members, 25 or so faculty members, and 10 contractors or others with access to campus. And I think it's really important to see those real numbers, because just like you said, it's not a big number until you're the person that it affects.
Yeah.
So
the family member of the person who was impacted, I mean, it has its impact.
Exactly.
Regardless of numbers.
Yes, regardless of the numbers. And so you have that human toll. I mean, you also, though, this study was very important, I think, in that it talked about the potential for long-term ramifications of the infection, even if you don't die. Because we don't really know exactly how long it lasts, what kind of heart inflammation young people could have, what kind of circulatory problems. There are reports of all those things. And it's hard to make decisions without information on those things, or it's hard to make decisions until those things have been elevated to your attention.
Yeah. Well, Rick, I mean, this is, as we said before, this is changing day to day, minute to minute. It's predicated on COVID cases in the area. Lots of lessons to be learned. I'm sure other schools are looking at Georgia Tech. They're looking at UNC Chapel Hill and adapting on the fly. Rick, I want to go to a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk about student housing at many of our public universities. What's that going to look like? You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms? Especially for the smaller businesses. I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
If you are like 58% of Americans, you didn't go to college. Or you did, but never finished. Maybe it's the thought of a big, intimidating campus. At Independence University, all classes are held online. Maybe it's the thought of being alone in a sea of students. At Independence U, you'll get a personal support team to help you every step of the way. Maybe it's the cost of all those books and supplies. Online means no books to buy. We even give you a new laptop and tablet to keep when you graduate. Maybe your life doesn't fit typical college classes. At Independence U, our online college fits your schedule. Let's meet a few students.
Independence University held my hand through the process.
Don't be afraid to take the leap because it has changed my life drastically.
Just take the first step and you can do it. If I did it, you can do it too.
At IU, there's no barriers to your degree.
800-535-9916.
Welcome back. We're talking to Rick Seltzer of Inside Higher Ed. Rick, thanks so much for staying with us this morning.
Thank you.
Well, I'm sure many of our viewers are really interested to learn about what's happening at college campuses around the United States. One area of interest I know that you and the team at Inside Higher Ed have been following is student housing, and there's been some developments there. What can you tell us?
Yeah, student housing is intimately tied to a lot of these decisions to reopen in-person instruction or reopen on campus or not, in large part because it is a financial either burden or boon to a university, depending on what you decide to do. A lot of these projects at this point have been contracted out under public-private partnership agreements. In many cases, you know, the buzzword is P3. And what you have seen on many campuses, not all, but many campuses, is an aging housing infrastructure or a need for new housing to be built, or demand among a certain tier of student who wants a nicer dorm room than just that old double without a wall down the middle, right? Like they want a suite, they want something nice, maybe some facilities inside to work out or what have you. And what a lot of universities have done is found developers who will oftentimes borrow and help the university refinance a portion of its debt. So that debt moves from the university balance sheet onto the contractor's balance sheet. And then basically the contractor gets paid back over a period of, it's typically decades. And the contractor in turn will manage the student housing, which is actually very helpful for universities in some ways too, because managing student housing is a real pain. In many cases, it's hard. It's hard work. It's capital intensive. It's people intensive. So this has been happening across the country for several years. That's nothing new. Probably some of the folks who watch this show have bonds or have some fixed income coming from some of these projects in one way or another. Yeah. But what we saw last week or a couple of weeks ago is a tipster elevated a document to our attention. And what it was is it was one of these private developers way back in May as the Georgia system, University of Georgia system, had been kind of formulating its plans for fall reopening. This developer weighed in with a letter and said, we just would like to remind you, our agreement with you, which spans 40 years, does not allow you to make unilateral decisions about housing occupancy if they affect revenue and hit our revenue. this particular developer is Rhode Island based, and it has it operates properties at 9 different campuses in the Georgia system. And this letter prompted in system staff kind of doing a financial analysis to say, okay, so Georgia State, one of the campuses, had a plan to reopen the particular project. It's the P3 project at 75% occupancy. What happens if we do that? And basically, they found that the cash reserve that was part of the project would be eaten up, and that without support from either the developer or the system office, that project would go into default. Interestingly enough, both that campus and the system have been saying that, well, it turned out that student demand for housing wasn't even 75% anyway, so it was a moot point, which is arguably true, but it's still important to note that there was kind of this discussion that went on behind the scenes. And basically everyone who was involved has denied that this influenced their decisions, that they were paying attention to the doctors only and not the financial side of things.
Sure.
Whether or not that's the case, I'm not to say. I will say one other university where I uncovered the exact same form letter sent to them too, Wayne State in Detroit. They had a response letter from their director of housing a week or two later, I think it was, and just shot back about how, don't worry, our president is a physician. Our president actually knows medicine, so don't worry, we're taking everything into account. Kind of a back off kind of a letter, but it's really been an interesting peek behind the curtain from just objectively looking at it. Covering this situation and reading about it hopefully helps you understand exactly how much entanglement and how one decision that a college makes about reopening in the fall affects 5 different things that it does down the line. And, a lot of these colleges and universities rely heavily on room and board fees. We've talked about that before, I believe. When you start to see those evaporate, the financial pressure goes in all sorts of different directions.
Yeah, I would just listen to what you're describing. There's a health perspective, which obviously in my mind is primary. And then there's the financial aspect, because you're running a business. Even if you are a public university or not, a 501c3, you are running some type of business where you need to have some level of profitability to support the organization. And what you're describing is you're almost like in a torture device, the old Iron Maiden, where you turn one way, you're spiked, and you turn another way, you're spiked. So it's a very difficult decision that obviously administrators are having to make they're having to make these decisions. I don't relish I don't want to be in their situation. I think it's very difficult. But Rick, I have to wonder, does this mean that contracts could change in the future? What do you do if you're a parent? Do you have the ability to say, look, I'm not going to send my kid, knowing everything I know, and I want some of my tuition back, or I want this or that? All these have implications down the line.
That's absolutely right. I think that the higher ed sector is actually in a more precarious position than it understands right now. I think botching fall reopenings again and again really could eat into trust, right? The part of the core value proposition that a college has is the education, yes, but it's also the relationship building, that in-person experience, and that trust that the parents and students who are footing the bill for the 18 to 24-year-olds, that trust they have that when I send my student away, you are going to allow them room to grow and take on more risk, yes, but you are also not going to put them at risk unnecessarily, and that we can trust you to pull the plug if and when that risk starts to grow. So I don't know that we're necessarily there yet, but it's an important moment for this sector to look at. And at the same time, it's a really risky moment for it financially, because on the tuition front, many families have been showing that they are tapped out or unwilling to pay rising tuition. So you've seen revenues shifting in many cases to room and board. And you've seen that ends up putting pressure, just like you said, student housing contracts. Do students demand money back when they do not spend the whole semester on campus because of a health issue? Well, it turns out, yes, that they do. A pandemic cause them to do that in the spring. So that
Yeah.
puts pressure down the line on these projects, and that will put pressure on the structure of some of these P3s and other off-balance sheet debt structures that we've seen, which I think in some cases universities have been really smart about how they structure these deals, and in others, I think the risk they're shouldering more risk than they realize.
Yeah, well, this is certainly something that I know that parents and students, and also those of you at Inside Higher Ed, have been watching very closely. Rick, always a pleasure to catch up with you. Really interesting topics, really important topics. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back on the program very soon.
I'll look forward to it too. Thank you so much.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest or somebody you think we should talk to? Drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the news in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, check out today's edition of our newsletter, The Morning Pulse. So until tomorrow, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.